stuff. Thank you for the feedback. Feedback is actually quite an important topic, especially in what I'm going to talk about. So getting in there early, well, very much appreciated. So thank you for that. I will continue to move on then. So my name's David Robertson. Today I'll be talking about Power Platform continuous testing. First of all, just want to thank all the speakers who've gone before me on this. It's been a great day, a great event from my side, and from what I've seen, some really interesting topics. It's been, you know, a lot of good presentations, a lot of good slides, a lot of hard work has gone into this, and also very much thank you to the organisers and also our sponsors. You know, without any of this, it wouldn't have happened. So and also thank everyone who's attended. You know, you've all come here to learn, to share knowledge and experience and learn stuff, and that's a very important part, a very important thing. And I'll go on to explain some of that during my talk, and where continuous testing can aid in that journey about learning and, you know, keeping pace of change and going on. Cool. So I'm going to go on to my first slide. So what is continuous testing? First of all, let's talk about some principles, and I like to get a little bit abstract and conceptual first, and then dive into the details. I'm also going to try and take my time and talk slowly as well, but I can get a little bit excited, so sometimes I might take a little bit of a breather and stop to think about how I want to say and phrase exactly what I'm going to say. So what's the first principle or vague concept I want to say? So the first thing that when I think about continuous testing and why this is important is, you know, change is the only constant, in my opinion. So the only thing that you can count on that is constant in this universe we live in is change. Also, in the context of this, you know, this is a global boot camp with everyone across the world and planet, and we all have a few things in common, especially when it comes to change and what's going on in the environment and stuff like that. So if we talk about context first, is, you know, we all live on Earth, you know, and how do we track change on Earth, sort of thing? You know, so for example, without change, time loses all meaning. And, you know, so what does time mean to us? It's a way of looking at the changes in our environment and what they means to us as humans, sort of thing. It's a way of putting some order in there and understanding that and how and tracking the changes. So if we look at time, we've got different ways and different variables in time, right? So we've got a year. That makes me think of Earth in relation to the sun. We have months. That can be related to the moon. We also have days. Now that can be related to Earth and such as things as like day and night as well. And we've got so yeah, these are different ways, and that means that time is about looking and you know, making sense of change and keeping track of changes in our environment. Now, as human beings, since we've come up with the concept of time and used time, things have started to change even quicker, right? We're now able to control our, you know, and influence our environment and actually increase or decrease the rate of change in our environment. So, you know, and one thing that I've noticed as well, and I'm thinking about, and that's on my mind at the moment, is, you know, the pace of our change to our environment has increased. Does this also mean that time can move faster, or if time is a concept and you're looking at a matter of perspective, you know, there's a lot going on in the world. There's been pandemics, you know, there's a lot of talk about digital transformation, digital disruption. This is all massive changes happening in our environment, you know, all around us every day. Something's different now, and it's just keep going. And I don't see this pace or rate of change slowing down at the moment. If anything, it just seems to be increasing. So how can, you know, and, you know, we've also talked about, so how can you keep up with the pace of change with software, which is kind of what you come up to continuous testing. So what is software, and first like that, and some of these buzzwords like digital, you know, and all this. So, you know, the digital world is fueled by data, right? And if we look at Power Platform and you think of stuff like Dataverse and some of the components in there, Power Platform, it's, you know, it has environments, you have Dataverse environments and stuff like this. Really, it's about powering people to influence positive change and outcomes using digital, using data, right? We can use in Dataverse and Power Platform, we can create, we can manipulate, we control, we can use, using logic and stuff like that. It's all about digital and change and environments, and it's fueling that. This is like, it's almost like another dimension, but not quite, right? It's a way of categorizing, and it should be used to empower people and influence good change. So that's my understanding of what's kind of, of why this continuous testing is important from a very abstract level and in the context of Power Platform. That being said, obviously there's personal meaning to me. I work with this technology as well, and I thought I'd go through, now we're getting the abstract, let's go down straight away into the personal, and I'll start talking about myself a little bit and my journey into where I'm now and how why continuous testing matters to me before I start going into the details of what it actually is and what it can apply to you and the businesses and the organizations you work for, and how it can help support you having positive change rather than negative change in your journeys to empowering change. So my personal story. I started off, and this is probably about 10 years ago, as a Microsoft apprentice, working with what was back then called Dynamics CRM 2011. Yeah, my first job, an apprentice, as I said, straight out of college. It was supposed to start off with in support, doing kind of like first, second line support. Also did a little bit of stuff with Office 365, which was cloud. We're probably all very familiar with that. That was quite interesting. So when I was in support, working with customers and clients, I would receive calls about stuff that's already happened, things that have changed, and then basically what impact that change has on them. And it tends to be very negative. And my job was there is to understand what change was negative that happened, understand why that happened, and then try and find a solution to undo that negative change, if that makes sense. I learned a lot about technology and stuff like that. And as you can see in this picture, sometimes I might make what I thought would be a positive change to address the negative change. But as you can see in the picture, when you fix one bug, you introduce several new bugs. When I was learning as part of my learning experience, I realized that, by fixing one thing, you can actually cause regression, which is quite something I learned back then. I also then started doing project work as well. I remember a key memory was doing an Office 365 migration with someone's website. And had to change some of their DNS domain records, to be specific, to point to from Exchange on-premise to Exchange online. Sounds like a nice change. Cloud was very new and was very much in demand at the time, and starting to get really in demand with all the benefits it could give. And so yeah, helping a client move from on-premise to online. And one of the things I did is I took down their website as part of that change. That was supposed to be a good change, but I didn't understand back then what I was doing, and I made the change straight in production. Not one of my proudest moments, but I definitely learned something from it.
David, sorry to interrupt. Actually, your slide deck got stuck. It's not being changed. Actually, it's not changing.
I'm actually just talking for now at the moment. Most of it is I've got some slides that are going on. So but most of the point is for me, I like to keep the slides simple and then just talk about them. And I've got some notes. So most of it is just talking at the moment. But thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no worries. So yeah. And I've got a demo coming up later, so there'll be more interactive stuff and less of me talking. But I wanted to talk about my experience first and to what continuous testing means to me and how I got to this point of realizing the importance of it. So yes, I think I mentioned I took the website down. And what I learned there back then was, if you're going to change things, make sure, also check what they were before. So that if you do change stuff, you can also undo the change if it's a negative change. So it's about looking at, first thing I learned there is when you're making change, how can you undo change if it's not going to go as intended? It was a lesson. Obviously, there's deeper lessons there, which I've realized later on in life, which I'll come to, which comes to continuous testing. But that was what I learned there. It was a very interesting job, learned a lot there. And then after that, I decided to go traveling, and I took a job in Thailand, Koh Samui, doing a project manager role for a digital marketing company. They also had a CRM system, not Dynamics, a different more niche product that also did marketing automation. I was quite confident going into that job based on how, because I ended up learning it a lot, and I thought I was ready for a more experience-based job sort of thing. And to be honest, I actually quite failed. I got let go, which is a nice way of saying I got fired from that job. And a large part of it is I was making mistakes. I didn't know, the key memory and the key mistake I made was I'm implementing a new marketing automation system and process, and something happened with it where it didn't quite work as expected. And then we made a change in production again, like last time, and it didn't work out how it was intended. And yeah, they didn't think they could, I couldn't continue working there. The lesson from there was, ideally you don't want to test things or make changes in production. So yeah, that was the next lesson from understanding what you changed, but actually test your change before it actually matters and makes the impact, or so you can avoid the negative consequences, not just dealing with consequences once they happen, which is what I learned from support mainly. So that was kind of the evolution on there from support. After that, did some general more IT contracts, did a few little IT contracts roles to get more familiar and to nail down on and increase some skills. Once I did that and built up my confidence again, I then went and moved to Gibraltar, which is on just across the border from the south of Spain. I took on a role as doing something called a CRM executive, which is basically bulk sending emails. I was ready to take the challenge on again now that I feel that I'd learned from some of my mistakes and I understood where I went wrong that time. First of all, sending a lot of emails to the customers. Stakes are quite high because we're talking about millions of customers per an email. It's a big company. I'm not going to name who, but yeah, so stakes are quite high. So that really helped me focus and really improve my attention to detail, but also understand and think about, what have I thought about what can go wrong, and maybe really think about analyzing and making sure everything's going right, but also understanding the value of having a second pair of eyes when doing things, because before then I used to do the homework and mark my homework, which is obviously not that helpful. And we can talk about stuff like BDD later and how that can help address that as well. But yeah, you don't want to be a one-man band. The team is important, and that's something I also learned there as well. I ended up doing that quite well, succeeded in there. So I got offered a new role in operations, which is a little bit different than support, but also obviously you interface with support, but you also interface with developers and testers and stuff like that. And the purpose of that was to keep their marketing system, which is one of our Microsoft's competitors, I won't name who, up and running. The processes we had were not quite mature, shall we say. It was quite new. It was a digital transformation project. Lots of, data migration, data loading, ETL processes. It was all new ways of technology. Plus, we had releases, and we didn't really have control of our own UAT or testing environment. So it kind of felt like whenever a change happened, it was done to us, not for us at times, and it complicated things. But also, I realized back then that there must be a better way of doing this, but I don't know how, and I don't know what it is. But I did enjoy that, and I learned a lot from that. But that's what inspired me to learn how can we do things early. Can I myself, some of the talkers have also talked about shift left. Can I shift left into the process, go back too close to the beginning of how things are done, and see maybe if there's problems there, or is it caused by there, or is it because that's what it can seem like from here? I don't think it is, but I don't understand that, but it feels that way sometimes from that perspective that I had at the time. So yeah, that was a new change from role. And after that, I went along to I started working with Microsoft technology again. Dynamics 365, it was called back. And this was a few years later after my first interaction with it. And started learning how to write code, taught myself how to write code, started with JavaScript, C# and all that. I had to manage the environments as the admin and stuff like that. And in some ways I was thinking, I got a little bit too clever for my own good by trying to avoid consequences. Once I made another mistake based on the lessons I learned before. I actually copied production data into a UAT environment, and the reason I did that is so that we could test production stuff before it was in production. But then I didn't think of the consequences that we were working with and integrating with other systems, particularly a marketing automation system, this one. And because of when I deleted data in UAT to test something, there was actually some logic that called a system that integrated with it that was all based on reference data and stuff like that, and actually went and deleted production data as well. So I was thinking, yeah, that was not right. That was definitely not a good move. So that's my, and then I started and I eventually joined my current company and learned from some really brilliant people about quality and about how to make sure you deliver fast, but also quality ways. And this is where, continuous testing comes in. So DevOps and ALM is a lot of it is about automation, process, and tooling. Some of it can be your deployments, some of it can be continuous testing, and continuous testing is about creating early, frequent feedback loops to understand the change that's happening in part of your environments and for Power Platform, and making sure the change is quality and positive and it doesn't cause regression. And from that would be the summary of that. Oops, I've gone a bit too fast on my slides. So I realize I've just done a lot of talking for the moment. Does anyone have any questions or comments for the meantime? Is there any questions or comments? Cool, no worries then. So that's what that means to me in my own personal journey of learning about how to improve and do things better and making sure they're there. Obviously, Power Platform is Microsoft's part of Microsoft's business applications estate, and it's very much for powering people in organizations. So shall we talk about some of the business benefits now? Let me just get them up. So continuous testing, let's start with a definition that you can use. Continuous testing in DevOps is a type of software testing that involves testing at every stage of the development lifecycle. The goal of continuous testing is to evaluate the quality of the software as part of a continuous delivery process by testing early and often. Acceleration and speed of software delivery. Finding bugs early not only saves time when it comes to release Windows bandwidth, but also helps save money and resource. Continuous testing finds and fixes defects using defect prevention strategies such as shift left testing. Improved code quality. Also mitigating the potential of manual errors. It can work with your DevOps processes quite well, especially if you're using Azure DevOps and these tools here. Obviously, with the feedback loops and this, you can speed up your time to delivery and also aid security and stuff like this. But long story short, this is your quality assurance and a way of making sure that the change and value that you want to deliver to your customer is going to have the intended effect that when you set out to do it, and to avoid negative consequences of this change. And it enables you to keep pace with the ever-evolving demand and changes that are required for your customers or your users. So let's get a little bit more specific. Let's talk about some test types. First of all, we have unit testing. Let's start at the lowest level. Unit testing, small, right? So a unit test is a way of testing a unit, the smallest piece of code that can be logically isolated in a system. It also, because it's small and because of how it works, and whether it's run locally and stuff like that, they tend to be and should be one of your fastest, if not the fastest type of test that you run. They also now, for better or for worse, they run in isolation. So you won't be running these against environments, against your real environments. So for example, Power Platform being a software as a service, you would tend to run you wouldn't be running your unit tests against them and taking into account what's going on in the environment. You can also mock and pretend as part of your unit test using some frameworks and tooling out there to represent the interactions between your code and Dynamics and Power Platform and Dataverse. However, that's written as mocking, right? So that could not get the results and not cover all angles that you might expect. So unit testing has some benefits and it can be good, but obviously with it being a low code, no code platform and being the direction that Microsoft are going with it, it becomes a question of, how important are unit tests to you? It's probably more important when you're writing custom code. However, in the way that's going, you should be writing less custom code. So I'm not going to talk too much about unit testing, and those are my opinions on it as well. I just want to clarify that. But yeah, those are my opinions on unit testing, but I'm not going to talk too much about it. Now we come to integration tests. I have a video here, and I'm going to try and play it. And this describes to me the difference between unit tests and integration tests in a bit of a jokey way. This obviously tests a door and a lock. Now, you can, I don't know if you can read into that a little bit, but you know, the lock on its own might seem to work when it's tested at the hardware store. Yep, good lock. Door by the door manufacturer. So yeah, right, this door, this opens, it closes. You know, both of these things work in isolation by themselves. However, when you integrate these two products, you get unintended results. The lock doesn't lock the door, which is what it's supposed to do. That's why, and that's the difference between a unit test and an integration test in my mind, is an integration test will look at your system and it'll run against your system, and it'll take in fact the environment that your code and all these other stuff are running, which is especially important for a technology that has software as a service, because it's not just, you know, infrastructure, it's not just code, it's not just data, it's a combination of all these things, Power Platform and also UI, but we'll get to come to that later. Now I'm going to move on to a little bit of a demo to show you some integration testing. And an example of a framework that I've created, that just to try and keep it simple and try and set the scene a little bit, to give a little bit more context, and hopefully I'll give you something to look at a little bit more. I'm going to move over to Visual Studio for now. Actually, bear with me, I'm just going to change my screen to which I'm sharing. Cool. So I have a Power Platform integration testing project here, and I have some folders. I have feature, contact, and test cases. I'm going to walk you through this, but first of all, I'm going to tell you what my requirements and what my system does. I've got a Dataverse Power Platform instance here, and it's simple. We have accounts, contacts, and reviews. When you create a contact, it creates a status to be reviewed. So from a UI perspective and from a user perspective and the requirements, create a contact, it needs to be reviewed, it needs a first name and a last name. Test. Demo. I'll save that. As you can see, we've got here, it creates a review. I'll go in here and I'll change it to completed. And that means the review's been completed. Let's click save now. And we should see it's now gone to status reason approved. Quite simple, want to keep the requirements simple. Now, how would we test that from an integration test perspective? I've created a framework here. What I've done is I've got some folders here. First one is feature. Got some contact tests here. And these will be my tests for contact. Now, you know, with this, to keep it easy and simple and using some of the stuff that, you know, Microsoft provide to make it easier to work with code and do integration tests, and or working with code or code projects with, you know, Power Platform. I've used stuff like the SDK. I've also used early bound generator to make it clear and consistent, and, you know, strongly bound, strongly typed for your entity framework. You can see the entity model here. It's got some of the entities there, which are defined. I've also got here some test setup, test initialize. So these will run every time before your tests start. First point is this connection to CRM, CRM connection, which if I show you the class in a moment, it's fairly simple, and I've kept it here so it can be reused easily. It's just using an environment variable, and it's just going along and it's just getting the context, organization, you know, CRM service context, which is related to the early bound, and it just handles your connection basically. The goal in this is, you know, to make a lot of the stuff repeatable and reusable, and to keep it as simple as possible. We also have test cleanup. One of the things it does is it creates a record creator, and this, when after the end of the test, it'll go ahead and delete all your created records. That way, and at least in integration testing as part of this, for your records that are created by the record creator, it will clean them up, minimizing your storage space as well, use and stuff like that, because, you know, there's no need to keep old data as part of your tests. We've got a test here. First test is create a contact to be reviewed. This will be the first step of what I've just showed you through the UI as a user, and to make sure that works and happens. We've got, first of all, I've got contact here. This is going into contact seed records. It's just going ahead and it's getting a contact to be reviewed, which is the base contact, which returns the base contact method, which is just basically defines the contact, so you can reuse that in your tests. Then we've got the a method here which creates the record, which in this case would be the contact. We then have a method here to retrieve the contact, which is actually a step here, which is used to make, which is something I'm going to be using and repurposing in other steps, which basically retrieves the contact, but also gets the related review record. But that's part of it once it's been created. We then also have something here called contact review assertions. If we go into this, you'll see in the folder here, we have assertions and validators. Contact review assertions are going to be a group of things that I want to be of validators. And then if we go into contact created review, we've got a load of asserts which are used to validate that the system is and that the processes and these.
Hi, David. Sorry to put in. Could you zoom in? We're struggling to read the code.
Sorry. Yeah, I've got a really high resolution screen, so it can be really hard to see. Sorry, I forgot about that.
Yeah, that's a bit better. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, mate. So yeah, we've got some asserts here. It's passing in the contract retrieved, and it's just asserting on the equal are the review and the status. So yes. So basically, first of all, is it's checking if the contact is at review stage when created and that it matches the status code value. It's also making sure the count on the customer review on the contact retrieved, the related customer, is equal to 1. It's also defining the review, and it's also checking whether the review status code is active, and it's also checking sure that when the review retrieved, which probably is kind of mute now thinking about it in hindsight, is also the right contact. So when you're creating a review, it's pointing back to the right contact as well on the lookup there. So that is the example of that and the test, and a simple test there. And as you can see from here, from this level and what your test looks like, I was trying to make it quite clean and simple. And then behind the scenes, it's got some stuff happening on, but it creates the test quite small. And as I think you mentioned before, Tom, arrange, act, assert in your presentation for integrations test, you're arranging, you're acting, and you're asserting. So I'm going to go ahead and run that test. Create a contact to be reviewed. Just going to run that. Now I ran it before, and it worked. So I'm hoping it, the time is going to be kind to me, and it's going to run this time. As you can see, it ran, and it actually ran fairly quickly. It ran in 11 seconds. So yeah, that's one of the benefits of integrations tests compared to some other tests. But although traditionally slower than most unit tests, integrations tests can still be quite quick, and that would be running against the environment which I pointed out. We also have created contacts to be reviewed and completed review, which would be the full process we did there, which would be creating, and then it's updating the review, as you can see here. It's retrieving the record again, and then it's just going to go ahead and do some more assertions. And this assertion will be contact review approved and contact review validator. Asserter equal contact status code approved, contact retrieved status code value. So that is just an example of some simple integration tests and a framework that you can be quick to deliver fairly quickly, and also start getting quick value, right? Because we want to do these things quick, so that you can do them with your keep pace with the rate of change that's needed, but also enable that quality, right? So in order to do that, as Tom mentioned and as Joe mentioned earlier, you want to try and keep things simple. And that's what I've tried to do and create this in a way that, you've got your features here, which relates to your use cases. For example, entity contact here being the main one. I'd also create another one for account. I might create one for review and isolation as well as a feature. I've also got all this kind of stuff. So yes, there's also another one called utility and the record creator. This is just going to be stuff that's shared across the that you might want to use across the different features that are useful for all of them. And in this sense, it's just create record, and then in a record's created, reversing the order of them, and then just delete it for each entity in there. It just goes ahead and deletes them in reverse order. The reason I'm doing it in reverse order is just trying to accommodate for the context is because of the relationships. It might be that you can't delete a record until you delete the record created before it because of the relationships, if it's got a restrict delete relationship and stuff like that. So you might want to reverse the order there. And that's why I've done that as well, just to take that into consideration. Cool. That is my integration testing framework. And I'm hoping, as you can see, I'm hoping that is helpful for you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. So on the integration testing and the example and the framework, do you have any questions so far or anything you want to ask? Because I reckon now's probably a good point for that. Don't know if there's any questions in the Teams window. Can't see any. Guess that's a no then. Cool. All right then. I'll move on to the next slide. Cool. Moving on to the next slide. I'm hoping you can see my screen. UI and acceptance tests. Talking about another group of testing. So what is UI and acceptance tests? UI acceptance tests how the system behaves via the user interface, and it also and you can also test that it's acceptable to the user and how it's performing. As we've gone through it, and there's a few frameworks and tooling out there. One thing you might have come across is Selenium. The purpose of this is to automate browsers. So in terms of UI, this is a software as a service. So it's all cloud-based and used through browsers mainly. This is quite helpful for those common use cases where people are using it through browsers. Built on top of that though is Easy Repro. Easy Repro provides APIs for interacting and automating the browser of Power Platform, Dataverse, and model-driven apps. So this will enable you to automate that from the browser interactions. We've also got another thing here called Spec Flow. This is a BDD tool which allows you to write your tests testing something called feature files using Gherkin syntax. It has bindings and stuff in the background that generates the code behind the scenes to automate your test and actually run the test. But it makes it nice and simple and easy to read. We also have an open source tooling here, which was done by a friend of mine who I work with called Max, and the tool is Power Spec Flow bindings. This is kind of like a combination of all three of the above, but it's got also some other useful features like data and stuff like that. And I'm going to show you some of that shortly. Yes, the things to note with UI testing is they can be flaky or brittle. The user or the browser, these things can change. Within the software as a service, also the browser how it's structured and the all elements, what's used to identify things by machine, can change and change frequently. So sometimes they can be a bit flaky and brittle, and also compared to integration tests, tend to be a lot longer. So there is some downsides to UI acceptance tests or some constraints that you want to take into consideration when you're using them, but I'll talk about them later. So yeah, those are some of that, and I'm going to move on and show you another demo because I like doing demos, and I think that'll be a bit more fun for you. So I'm going to start sharing my screen again on a different window. This time I'm going to try and zoom in a bit more than 64%, I think, because I can see that was not enough last time. Cool. Still on the same solution. Let me see. I hope that's better for everyone. That's a lot more zoomed in. I've got this Power Platform UI testing project. Now, in terms of configuration, all you really need is this Spec Flow JSON and some just configuration here, which is username. It's got a user defined there, which is going to be my test user for this. Just saying running Chrome. I've set headless to false. That means it's going to actually run on the screen rather than run silently, although it's still going to take up a lot of my laptop's resource because it's going to run locally. And also, it's got the URL, which will be your environment URL for where you're pointing this to. So you can also put reasons why it's environment variables is so that you can change it on pipelines and releases, especially if you're using Azure DevOps. You can point to different tenants and instances and environments. Cool. Also, so I mentioned Spec Flow and a feature file. This is what, according to this product, what they will look like as an example of how you can write a UI acceptance test using Spec Flow, using these bindings, which is a combination of Spec Flow, Easy Repro, Selenium and stuff like that. The feature is contact review, and I've written just a simple scenario: create contact review, and all it says is, given I'm logged into ALM Bootcamp app as a Power Platform user, and I've created contact, and I've opened a contact. When I select the first record from the review subgrid, and I update the review status to completed, and I save the record, and I've you're supposed to not use given here again, but I've done it for simplicity. It's a guideline more than a rule. Given I've opened the contact, then I can see a value of approved on the contact. So that pretty much describes my scenario and what I'm trying to test, and I'm going to do this from the UI. So the first point is it's logging in. I showed you the user. The next point is it's creating a contact. This is a data file, and as you can see, simple JSON. So for those of you who are familiar with JSON, this should be fairly simple. It's just logical name, which would be enter your logical name, your field names. Alias here is used to refer to it. You can also use this in other data files to refer to other data that's created and stuff like that if you want to do deep inserts or create records with relationships and stuff like that and reference each other. But yes, that's how you simply define what contact is. Now, moving past that, I am going to run the test and show you what happens. Let's run this, and this is the one I'm really hoping works. Cool. As you can see, its browser's opened. It's saying Chrome is being controlled by automated task software. I think I'm still on camera, so hands-free. What it's done is it's taken us to the login screen. Put my username and password in. Good stuff. The first step, login, seems to work. It's now going to take us to the app selector. Should take us to the ALM Bootcamp app. There is some additional functionality here where you can use profiles, so you can kind of skip so it's automatically, you're already logged in, so it takes advantage of browser cache. I haven't done that this time because I want to show you the login process, but this is useful for speeding things up. But in the content, I wanted to demonstrate the whole process, so I didn't do that this time. My network just cut out there, I believe. I just stopped talking. Can someone confirm they can still hear me now? Hello, can anyone hear me? Oh, you can. Good stuff, Tom. Thank you. I had a network issue, so I'm going to restart that test. Bear with me. It still seems to be running even though it's not supposed to, which is let me check on this one. It's just taking a moment because of the network connection. I'm just going to build it again. That should reset it. Cool. There we go. It's kicked it off again. I'm not going to repeat what I did earlier. But I think it was I talked about the login process and that, and I was hoping that happened before my network disconnected. Cool. At this point, it's logged into the app. Should be behind the scenes creating that contact and then also the review. And then it should, from the UI, open the contact. Let's see. Always get nervous with live demos. There we go. It's opened the contact. And as we can see, I'm the contact and it's created a review. It's going to change the status reason to completed. Should at this point save the record. Did mention UI test can take a little bit of time sometimes, right? So clearly doing that right now. There we go, saving. At this point, it should be looking to open the contact again. Gosh, it doesn't normally take that long. I'm doing a lot on my network though, so it could be slow by that because of the environment. There we go. Let's open the contact. And as we can see, status reasons approved, and my test should pass. There we go. As you can see, that test passed, and it took 3 minutes. Vastly different from the integration test. Still very valuable, but there's things you have to consider, especially if you're having loads of them, which can be good to have. So, yes, there is some other features on here, but I'm not going to go over the tooling too much. I just wanted to show an example, and that was the easiest way for me to create an example of a UI testing because it's a tool I know and I'm familiar with. So yes, I'm going to move back on to the slides. And yes, I want to talk about a little bit about when and where and how you can use these to continuously test as part of your development process. So just going to share my screen and get my presentation again. So when and how to do continuous testing. So we talked about the type of tests, right? Unit test, quick, isolation, small. We've got int tests, in between the UI and unit test tends to be in terms of speed, but also it tests more of the environment, stuff like that. Then we've got the UI acceptance test, which tends to be the slowest at the bunch, but also focus on, you could say, a very important aspect about how it works for users and that it's acceptable for them as well. So all of these have different benefits and work at different levels, but you have to consider these different things about how you use these tests in your development process stages. So when it comes to development, right, that tends to be the first point. You will probably want to do, say you're doing code and stuff like that, or you make a change to code, you're going to want to run your unit tests locally. You can also run them as part of your pull request process. On the sort of DevOps, you've got a nice functionality where you can do builds that run as part of your PR. So when you submit your branch and you raise your pull request, that can go off and trigger and run your unit tests automatically. Integrations tests, as they're quite quick and you can tend to parallelize them. You probably also want to run them locally as well. You will want to run them as part of your PR process as well, in my opinion, because also they're quite quick and you can check them there. But then you have to have your PR pointed to an environment as well, because obviously these run against an environment. Also, you probably want to run them, and this is an opinion of mine. If you use CI/CD or have an environment for CI/CD and also a test environment, your first test environment, say it's a system test, you might want to run your integrations test post-release as well to validate your deployment. So there's different stages on the development cycle you can do your integration test set. Now, when it comes to UI and acceptance tests, I'm not sure there is a correct answer here because they're very valuable, but that also can be quite slow, even if you parallelize them, and they can be quite resource intensive. So you can end up having to have multiple VMs or a very big VM to run them or parallelize them if you end up quite a few and they've taken a few minutes to run each of them. So obviously, you're not going to want to run all of your tests locally. Once you've done some development or you change the UI, you're not going to want to run there and sit for an hour before you can submit your change. Do you want to do it as part of your PR? I don't know if you want to have a PR open for that long. Maybe you can. Maybe that's okay. Depends on your requirements and your environment that you're working in and the constraints and the need for them. You can also, for some people, I know some solutions have, spun up CI/CD environments that actually run pre-pull request process as part of the PR process before you merge into main. So it can actually be nice if you don't mind having it waiting there to actually go and spin up CI/CD, run all your tests, including your UI and acceptance tests, and then once all your tests pass, you shift left, no conflict, then you submit your code, and then it deploys those test environments afterwards, and then you just need to run your integration test. You could run your acceptance tests afterwards as well, just to validate everything's deployed successfully as well in your test environment, but also check everything's in CI/CD and is functioning on a clean environment as expected. Those are the different stages and tests and how you could possibly run it. Obviously, you've got stuff like tooling like Azure DevOps, which can, you can put on your repos there and source control for your changes in your code and your testing. You've also got the different stages such as pull requests, builds, and releases. This all can facilitate that. But also there's stuff like, there's GitHub and there's other tooling out there. So I was trying not to tie myself to one specific tool, except for there's a demo. So I'm just trying to use it as to give an example. That comes to the end of my presentation and what I've got. I hope you've enjoyed this and it's been of some use. If you've got any questions or comments, please do raise them. I'm looking forward to hearing some. And yeah, I hope this has been helpful. Oh, so when do I typically run the UI test? That's a good question, and it depends. I think if I like running them. So it's a question on my mind at the moment because I'm actually having to do it on a project. I want, because of the time constraints and because of our current ALM processes. I've seen them. Yes, exactly. Those are the two options we're considering at the moment: is post deploy, but also running it, or alternatively run them overnight against an environment. Because that way you're not getting resource contention such as build pipelines, build VMs and stuff like that, or build agents and stuff like that. So it's less likely to get contention on resource, but also you're not slowing things down or waiting for it to happen in order to move forward on your process and able to deliver at speed. So yeah, both options are viable and provide value. It can be a question of preference depending on certain situations. Yeah, absolutely. I've seen that too, Mark. I've seen them done as part of disposable environments. That can be quite a good way of doing it, especially if you don't, especially if sometimes having a PR open, for if say it's within an hour or two, isn't necessarily a bad thing. Can be acceptable. So if that is an acceptable thing, then having those disposable environments, that is definitely a good way of doing it. It's definitely possible and can be a good way of doing it. And also, it's nice to have your UI test confirmed before you merge into main. So, main is always deployable at this point. MFA, that's an interest. That is an interesting question. When it comes to this tooling in specific, I haven't had to tackle MFA in my own personal use of it. I'm not the tool creator. I have contributed, so I don't know the answer. I'm sorry. I'd have to get back to you or raise a question with the original creator for you on that on MFA. Also, there is a chance we can create test users, and just for those users, test users for the UI users, you might be able to turn off MFA for them, but that might obviously be based on your organization and your governance and your policies there. So I understand that might be possible, but I don't know if we can do MFA if you have to have it for your test users or UI testing. I'll take note of that. If MFA is spot by Easy Repro, but if it's, I'm not sure it is or isn't on this tool, but I'm going to try and take note of that because, a large part of that tooling that I've shown, which to show the example, is supposed to get as close to parity with Easy Repro as well. It uses Easy Repro, so it should be something we look to implement if it isn't already supported on this tool. So requirements change. Yeah. So it could be a use case, you've got something in my example there, you might want to change to a new status sort of thing. Then really you need to update your tests because your functionality's changed. So I guess it would be updating your tests to meet the system. Your system evolves over time, so should your testing, in my opinion. And that's what I think would happen is you'd have to evolve your test scenarios or your features and test cases as your system evolves, in order to keep pace and minimize that chance of regression, right? And being able to keep delivering at pace. Cool. At this point, I'm going to pop in my contact details for LinkedIn. So if anyone has any questions or comments or want to follow up or want to talk more about the specifics of things I've shown, how many questions on continuous testing, how this can be done, feel free to connect. Or if you just want to connect with me anyway, my LinkedIn is in the window. So yeah, feel free to connect with me if you'd like to. And you can always message me about any of this stuff as well as any of the topics. Thank you very much. Just say, I think that was the last session for the day. I wasn't sure who was going to wrap up for today. Raz, so if you're there, do you want to say some final things before we close for the day?